I think we should start by giving people a little read on what Intercom is, since some may not be familiar.
Yeah, so Intercom is a customer communications product and platform. We're about 11 years old. We were founded in Dublin. There's 4 founders, all Irish. And since then, we've grown to just around about 1,000 people over the last 11 years.
And you actually joined the company when there were 14 to 1,000. So you've seen a lot of growth, not only at Intercom, but also at Dyson, Facebook, Google, a lot of big names, a lot of explosive growth.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride. I worked at, like you said, at Google and Facebook, and these companies were at scale when I was there. And so yeah, I joined Intercom, total bet at the time, like you said, 14 people, but big ideas and some really talented founders. And we've had our ups and downs. We've made a ton of mistakes along the way, but it's been great.
So based on the mistakes you've seen, not only at Intercom, but at some of these other big companies, what are the most common mistakes that companies make as they are trying to grow quickly?
Yeah, lots and lots of things. And so we are kind of obsessed with trying to grow fast. And as I'm sure many startups and scale-ups and different types of companies are trying to do. And so the biggest thing for us is we're obsessed with learning the mistakes we're making and then trying to encode them. So actually the first thing is we're very principles-driven as a company. We have a set of principles that we've evolved over the last 10 years, I guess. We follow them, we teach them to people, and that helps us not make the same mistakes over and over again. So that's a big one. Other things, as we've grown the company, we've grown it too fast at times, not fast enough at other times. We've hired well, we've hired poorly. We've struggled with priorities at times too, like trying to understand what to say no to. There's so much opportunity in tech in general that you have a lot of things in front of you, and it's hard to know which one to pick at any given time. So a lot of things.
Okay, well, let's dig into some of these, because they're issues that a lot of people, a lot of founders will have grappled with. You've talked with me in the past about principles and how principles are not only important to a company's mission and core values, but also, perhaps even more importantly, in helping to navigate the challenging times of growing a business. And alongside that, you've also talked about how defining the customer is as critical as defining the product. And if I think about that in my own terms as a journalist and writer, the first thing we ask as journalists and writers when we're given an assignment is, who's the audience?
Yeah.
Who am I writing for? And you don't put pen to paper or even brainstorm ideas for something until you know who your audience is. And it's exactly the same in growing a business. So what are some of the key principles that have helped Intercom navigate challenges? And how has defining your customer helped to also bring clarity during moments when there's chaos?
Yeah. So we have 4 principles in product and engineering in particular that we use to decide how to work and what to do. They're hard-coded by learning the hard way along our journey. So one of the principles, our first principle, actually have an order to them, it's a sequence to them. The very first one is start with the problem. And that's really about our customers. And so oftentimes when we, especially in our early days, we're looking at like the product and the market, and of course people talk about product market fit. Do you have a good product and do you have a good market? In my experience at Intercom initially, but then also through talking to lots of startups, working with different companies and trying to help them along their journey, people obsess about the product because typically products are built by product people and many companies are founded by product people and not nearly enough about the market. And I would say of those 2 things, the market's more important than the product. I'm a product person, and so maybe that's a bit strange to hear, but the market's way more important. So you can have a good product in a good market, and you'll probably do fine. You can have a poor product in an amazing market and do phenomenally well, and you can have a brilliant product in a poor market, and it will fail. And I've experienced more or less all of those permutations at Google in particular and Intercom. And so when we think about starting with the problem, we think about making sure that in this market, the customer problems that we're trying to solve are both clearly identified, like it's clear what the problem is, and that's we can only learn that through research, through talking to customers. You know, we've a value about obsessing with customers. I talk to customers every week still at our scale. Our team talks to customers every single day. So that's one big thing. The problem is clearly identified. But then I learned this again through failing. The problem has to be important to the customer. Like we may think, oh, hey, this is a really important problem, but it's got to be important to them. And oftentimes, when you go talk to them and really talk to them, you learn that the problem that you're trying to solve for them is like 20th in their list of problems, and they're just not that motivated, you know, to try your product. And then the last piece is that the problem is important to them, and then there's tons of people who have this problem, and it's important to them. And so this whole area is where a lot of startups that I see and talk to tend to struggle with and ultimately fail in some cases.
How do you avoid, once you've identified the problem, how do you avoid overcomplicating the pursuit of a solution, which ultimately leads to mission creep, distraction, and just, you know, the bubbling of ideas about how to make everything better?
Yeah. That's a good segue. Our second principle is think big, start small. And so we have an obsession with a few things. We have an obsession with speed and execution, speed of execution. But we have an obsession with starting small too and scoping. And so with this principle, we will always say that we are trying to design and build the smallest possible solution to the problem, the smallest possible thing. And often the smallest possible thing is just not that interesting to you. You know, like we have an engineering principle around being boring. Like boring is good. It's so easy to get caught up in more elaborate solutions. They're more fun or engaging, or the latest technology, the cutting edge thing. You want to try it. I saw this a lot at Google, for what it's worth, like things that didn't work out because it was just way too complicated. The solution was just over-engineered, overthought. And so we have this obsession with the most simplest thing, getting it to market as fast as possible. And hopefully it works and customers are happy and you can move on to the next thing, and then you can just build momentum that way. And if it doesn't work, if you've cut too much, you'll quickly learn. And then you need to add back things in or expand the scope and so on.
What about competing priorities? It's very easy to say startups need to focus on fast growth. But how do you avoid growing too fast, which can be a massive problem and has imploded companies? And how do you handle competing priorities? And just to share a personal example, I have approached hot, trending startups for big interviews, and I've been turned down because they're too busy fundraising. Yet, at the same time, the press could help them attract funds. So that's just one small example. I'm sure there are even more relevant examples of how competing priorities can again cause a chaotic environment because everything's important.
Yeah. A second thing, so I think the best way we manage, it's hard, first of all, it's really hard. We struggle with it all the time. I personally struggle with it all the time. I often find myself making lists of things that I could do and trying to order them, reorder them, draw a line, which is like, you know, having a healthy work-life balance is the line, basically. And so I find myself doing this all the time. It's a constant struggle. But the way that we do it is by writing down goals. So we're very as well as being principle-driven, we're very goal-driven. So for example, all of product and engineering write goals. We take our strategy, we break it down to a roadmap, and then we break the roadmap down into goals. And we work in 6-week cycles. So we'll have 6-week goals, and then we'll break them down into weekly goals, and then down into daily goals for individuals. So there's a whole system of breaking down the things we could do into the goals, which are the things we will actually do. And so this system of setting goals, writing down goals, automatically makes you start filtering stuff out. Because you immediately start thinking like, okay, my goals for this week are like A, B, C. I can't do D and E. Okay, but maybe, and you have to swap them, you know, and so at the end of the week then as well, you of course look at your goals and think, did I hit these goals or not? And again, it's a feedback loop, and you learn very fast what you can and can't do, and that helps to like take fun, cool things away and actually focus on the things that matter for the business.
Hiring is one of the biggest mistakes that founders and their colleagues make, not just in startups, but all the way through to big companies. What are some of the biggest mistakes you've seen, and how can startups avoid them?
Yeah. I'll start with some of the mistakes I've made personally. I think maybe about, I want to say 6 or 7 years ago, I can't remember what size Intercom was, maybe 200 people, something like that, 300 maybe. And we were doing well, growing well, all the typical problems that you'd experience as you're trying to scale the company globally. And one of the things that I thought was a good idea was that I had so many gaps in my own understanding. Like again, like I come from big companies, Google, Facebook, all the stuff was kind of set up when I joined. And at Intercom, we were building this thing ourselves from scratch. There was no one else. You know, like I'm in the exec team of the company from the early days, and we would all look at each other and think like, there's literally no one else. It's just us trying to do this thing. And so I started hiring people from big companies, hiring people from competitive companies, people who had done it before. And more often than not, that didn't work out. It didn't work out because the reputation of the company, or maybe the team they were on, outweighed their own personal impact on that team. And you only kind of start to learn this and realize, hang on a second, the thing I thought this person wanted to do at Intercom or was up for doing or motivated to do is not actually what they want to do at all. And this is less about talent oftentimes and much more about motivation. The things they wanted to do. Like if you come from a big company where you have all the resources in the world and join a scrappy startup, not fighting for life, but certainly with very limited resources and an obsession with speed and time and progress, it's not for everyone. And so people would join and realize this wasn't for them. But then the other thing that we realized was that these new people would bring with them the speed of execution of their prior company. Mm-hmm. And so they would come in and just automatically the thing would get slower because the speed of execution of the company they came from was slower than Intercom. And so we kind of learned that oftentimes this can work, but we needed to know that these things would be happening as the people joined.
What are some of the questions that one can ask in an interview to kind of weed out candidates who may not be appropriate for the reasons you outlined?
Yeah, it's very hard to do, I should say. Like very hard. Interviewing in general, I find quite hard. I have said no to some of our best people, and I've said yes to people who didn't work out. So it's very hard. One of the ways in which we interview is that we have 6 values. So I mentioned principles and goals. The third thing, there's only really 3. The third thing that we're obsessed with about in terms of running the company is values. We have 6 values. We interview against the values. So for example, one of our values is a value that says we value people who make every day count. And this is connected to the goals as well. But we value people who make every day count. People who come into work every single day, they're motivated, they know what they want to do, they're progress oriented, as opposed to like people who come in and are just taking life at a slower pace, and so we interview for these things through the values, and that's the kind of best way we found to do it.
You just mentioned being able to say no. I want to just come back to the customer and this big emphasis that you place on the customer driving a lot of the decisions, which is really crucial. I mean, it's the basics of putting the customer first. What about saying no to customers? I've interviewed founders who have had the best success once they've managed to say no to customers. What's Intercom's take on that, and do you have any anecdotes you can share about doing that yourself?
Yeah, so we do say no to customers. Not the most pleasant conversation to have to do it sometimes, but I think it's really important. So the way we work is we kind of have, a principle that we will not build a one-off feature for a one-off customer. And no matter the deal size, no matter the brand, the company, the logo.
And presumably you've walked away from valuable deals on this.
We have, yeah we have. Now there's a middle ground, which I can get to, but the reason for this is the minute we start building one-off features for one-off customers, like we have 30,000 customers, and so the minute we build like one-off features for one-off customers, the product starts to just expand. It starts to be filled with features that make no sense to the other 29,000 customers, and you just get product creep, and it just ruins the experience of the product. And a big reason people buy Intercom often is the user experience of the product. So that's the reason we don't do it. And what we do is we have a process whereby if we're hearing these things from customers and they're not one-offs, they're things that multiple customers are asking us for, and it's clear that it's a problem that is shared by a whole bunch of customers, then we will look at moving it up our roadmap. So we'll say, hey, this is more a timing question. We're going to get to this. It's just a matter of time. It could be Q4, and so let's take it up to Q2 and talk to the customer about it. Again, do research with the customer, take them into the beta of it, make sure that we are actually solving the problem in the right way. But we will do that. If we see common things, then we'll bring them forward.
Okay. Well, we'd love to open up for questions. If anyone listening has any questions for Paul about growing and how to manage growth, especially fast growth. I think there's someone walking around with a mic. I don't see the person walking around with the mic. Hang on. We're getting the guy with the mic. Any questions?
Can you hear me?
Hi.
Yes.
Yes, hi.
Hi, hello. I'm a fellow product person. And how do you differentiate between users and customers? Because it's easy to get data on users because you have them on the app, but they're not the customers. They're not the one paying and deciding to hire your product.
Yeah, let me try and answer that. Tell me if I don't answer the question. So the question was about the difference between users and customers. We're a B2B company, and so we have our customers who are other businesses, and then obviously those customers of ours have their customers, users. I don't know if this answers your question. We think about both. And so one of the defining characteristics of Intercom, the product, that we've had from the very earliest days is that we design for both sides. And this is actually related to the saying no to customer thing, where we do research with our customers, and we design for them too. And in the early days, this worked out pretty well. You know, a lot of startups were happy. They were proud to have Intercom on their product, like our messenger on their website or in their app, because they thought it was well designed. As we've gotten bigger customers, they want the Intercom messenger to feel bespoke to their app and product and be indistinguishable, so it feels native. And so we've started building a lot of configuration features. So we do think about both, and we do design for both.
Any other questions? Oh, I think just right behind you.
Yeah, hi, my name is Søren. I'm from a company called Signit. I have a question to you regarding how long do you look out in the future in terms of your product map? Because you're talking about priorities and so on, and very often it can be very hard to focus on very long-term development when you're a startup, but that can often actually give you the big edge. So how do you approach that?
Yeah, so sorry, I couldn't hear you probably. Is it the question is how long into the future do we roadmap and plan and?
Yeah, and how do you handle prioritizing the short term
yeah.
versus the long term?
Yeah, so this has changed over the years. In the early years of Intercom, when we were again maybe 50 people, then 100 people, we looked at a very short time horizon, and so it was 6 months. So we would have a roadmap. We have kind of a general strategy for longer than that. We actually use this framework called 666, which is 6 years, 6 months, and 6 weeks. 6 years is like, hey, what do we think the world will look like in 6 years? How will Intercom have shaped that? How will it have shaped Intercom? But like pragmatically speaking, we have like runway and X amount of money left, and so 6 months was our time horizon. And I remember at the time thinking, we will never have a 2-year roadmap. We will never have a 1-year roadmap even. But dogma kills you, and so right now we have a 1-year roadmap and a 2-year kind of thing too. So you need to be open-minded, and it changes as we got bigger. It changed, and mostly because our customers were asking us, "Hey, 6 months isn't long enough. If I'm signing a deal with you, the deal's 12 months. So the deal is longer than your roadmap. So these days, we have a 1 year, we look at 1 year. And then in terms of how we prioritize, we are very focused on trying to deliver solutions to customers as soon as possible. So we do, in terms of execution, we do focus very much on the next kind of quarter, next 2 quarters. So the next 2 quarters still is the heavy emphasis of what we build. And then a minority, maybe like 10, 20% is more speculative things that may or may not work out.
Any other questions? We have time probably for 1 or 2 more. I think in the front.
Thank you. My name is Michael. I also have a follow-up questions around the roadmap thing. So
Can you just speak a little bit louder?
Yes, sorry.
Thank you.
I have a follow-up question around roadmaps. So my question is around how specific are you in the roadmap around exactly like what the solution is going to look like, or is it only on a problem level? Like how much details you need on it to, you can say, convince customers that you're understanding the problem and you want to go in that direction, versus constraining yourself too much, so when you actually dive into the problem, you figure out that the solution might be something different?
Yeah. So our roadmap, generally speaking, our roadmap is problem-oriented. So the roadmap says, hey, we're going to solve these customer problems. And what we do have is we have a tool called Centralized Insights. And what that does, the way it works is our support team, our customer support team use Intercom, obviously, given it's a customer support product in part. Every single conversation that they have with customers is tagged. So it's tagged with what it is, like feature request or usability problem or bug or whatever. And then it's tagged with the team who own that part of the product. And so so we could generate hundreds of those a day, hundreds of customer conversations a day. And our sales team, when they're talking to prospects or talking to existing customers, do exactly the same thing. In Salesforce, they use Salesforce. Every single conversation is tagged. We use Gong as well. Every Gong call, everything, and then everything goes into the system. And what it does is it generates kind of like a top 10, top 50 list. Hey, here are the most common problems that we hear. And then you can filter it by company size or all sorts of other things. And that's what we use to inform the roadmap. And so those things are often framed as problems. Like, hey, the product can't do X. And so the roadmap is problems. But then very early in any project, we will try and validate through research with customers or alphas or betas, try and validate as early as possible that, yes, we're on the right track, we're solving the right problem. And oftentimes we don't get it right, and the problem gets refined halfway through the project. But yeah, it's problem-oriented more than solution-oriented.
I think we have time for just one quick question, if there is one.
Hi. Thank you for what you said about starting small. I completely agree with it. Nevertheless, we're in a situation where we are a deep tech startup, meaning that even the smallest version is rather large. How do you de-risk something like that when you can't start any smaller?
Yeah. This is something that we struggle with sometimes too. So one of the hardest things we've had to learn, teach new people who join Intercom is they often ask, how small is small? And our answer typically is smaller than you think, which is a step in the right direction, but still not the answer. And so it does depend. So for example, we have just redesigned and rebuilt our inbox. It took 6 to 9 months, which for us is a long time for a project. Maybe it took 12 months end to end. So that isn't necessarily small either. So there are times and exceptions where we will have bigger projects. But I do believe, I can't speak to the space you're in, but I do believe that almost all companies have an opportunity to start smaller than they already default think. There's almost always a smaller version if you just keep going and keep going and keep going.
Just to add, I think it's about probably thinking more critically about the problem, and rather than sort of defaulting to the fact that what you do is quite complex, so it's always going to be complex, asking the key question, can we make this simpler? And if so, how? So I think once you start asking those questions, that helps to sort of drive the approach, if that makes sense. Thank you so much. We're out of time, but these have been great questions, Paul. Thank you so much, and I hope
you.
we've given you some valuable things to take away. Thank you.
Thank you.